My name is Rod Richardson. I'm the Vice Chair of the Zoning Board, and welcome to everybody. Hopefully, we can move through tonight's agenda. We have some interesting things on the agenda, one application. So I'll call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call, please.
Ken Sanderson,
Here.
Kelly Rast, present. Fred Wingert,
Here.
Rod Richardson,
Here.
and Ken Klingon-Smith is absent.
Thank you. Could we have the statement for hybrid in-person or virtual meeting read?
Sure. This meeting is now being recorded in the board hearing room with the zoning board members attending in person. There's an option for virtual attendance on Zoom webinar. For Zoom attendees wishing to speak, please use the raise hand function in the Zoom app at the start of the agenda item on which you desire to comment. Comments will be received from in-person attendees first, followed by Zoom participants. When it's your turn to speak, the moderator will recognize you by name or phone number used to join the Zoom webinar, and your microphone will be unmuted. Please state your name and the city and state where you reside for the record, followed by your comments. All public speakers will be limited to 3 minutes unless the chair designates a different time period. If you have trouble with Zoom, please call 913-715-9666. Board members, staff, and presenters, please state your name every time you begin talking, and please speak into the microphone so that people attending via Zoom can hear you and the comments can be transcribed for the record. This is a public meeting. We are presenting live and recording the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, Rod Richardson, Vice Chair. The second item we have is our agenda items. Looks like we had 3 items, 2 of which stand for requested continuance, and a third one, a conditional use permit. Is there any need to add, delete, or revise the agenda from staff or board member? No, none. Hearing none. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
So move, Ken Sanderson.
Fred Wingert, second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. The agenda is approved as submitted. We need to know if any member of the board is in a position of need to disclose conflict of interest on any of the items on the agenda. Hearing none. Any disclosure of external contacts or discussions concerning any items on this agenda? Nope. Hearing none. All right. The third item is approval of the minutes. Assume everyone's had an opportunity to review those. So I would inquire of the board members if they have any motion to modify or revise the minutes. Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Fred Wingert, so moved.
Kelly Rast, second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes of October 2nd, 2024 are approved. The fourth item on our agenda is board reports. Do we have a Board of County Commissioners action report from staff?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sean Pendley, County Planning Staff. For Board of County Commissioners actions on October 31st, the Board of County Commissioners approved the conditional use permit for the baseball field at 183rd and Flum with a 10-year term on the conditional use permit. If you recall, this is the application that came before this board in at the beginning of October, so just within less than a month. The board considered it. They did recommend approval as stipulated by the zoning board, and that was the only action item in this last month for the board, for this board.
Thank you. Any planning? No planning commission action?
Actually, there are a couple of planning commission updates to mention. We did have in the October meeting for the planning commission, we did have an update from Clarion Associates. They are the consultant that's helping us with the zoning and subdivision regulations update. So this evening, they will be giving an update to you just right after this item. We also did have a planning commission training session in the October meeting. The 2 topics were city-county collaboration and also infrastructure planning. So staff presented some information, had a discussion with the planning commission to answer questions. We will have additional training sessions going forward. And this is based on a survey responses from the planning commission. We do anticipate having another training topic update for the meeting this month. The next meeting is scheduled for this month on November 26th. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any board member have any questions of staff? concerning that? All right. Mr. Leipzig, are you going to take the next item, which is zoning and subdivision regulations update, Clarion Associates presentation?
Yes, good evening. Chairman, members of the board, Jay Leipzig, the planning director. Just a quick introduction to this topic. We've mentioned this several times. We have enabled a consultant to help us with our zoning and subdivision regulations. This is a current copy, which is, so it's certainly somewhat antiquated, needs to be updated. We've been doing it for a number of years and getting by with this and doing periodic updates, but we really need a comprehensive review and update of that document to help it be reorganized and make it more user-friendly. We have executed a contract with Clarion and Associates, which is a nationally recognized urban planning firm that specializes in this type of work. They work all over the country, and I think very recently they just completed a comprehensive plan update for the city of Overland Park. So they're familiar with the area, familiar with land planning, and we're pleased to begin this project with them. They're headquartered in Denver, Colorado, but they also have some local folks as well. We also are working with Olson and Associates, which is the local engineering firm that is part of this group as well. They're going to be helping out with the engagement and communication piece. But on Zoom this evening, we're going to have an update from Paul Donegan, who's one of the lead planners on this project. We also have Eliza Blood is with Clarion Associates, and then Elizabeth Garvin is the principal with Clarion Associates. So we have those three people with us this evening, and I believe Paul is going to be presenting a brief update to you. And I apologize in advance. I think some of you, as part of the advisory committee, may have already seen this presentation, but it's very good information. We're excited to kick this project off, and this is a long-term project that will last about 18 months. So you'll be hearing about this several times in the next couple of years almost. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
All right. My video is not able to play. And one other question, sorry for the host. Elizabeth Garvin is listed as a attendee instead of a participant. Would it be possible to promote her up so she can speak as well?
Yes, I have just done that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. With that, let me share my screen. And we can start in on a presentation. Thanks so much, members of the zoning board, for hearing from us today.
Paul, we are not able to see your screen yet.
How about now?
I can see it on Zoom, but I still see the agenda on Johnson County Planning Division video feed.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure. Do differently here. Let me just try again. Are you able to see that?
Paul, this is Sean Penley. We're trying to get the technical bugs worked out here on this end so we can see it in the board hearing room. Yeah, if you could hold for just a minute, we'll see if we can get that set up.
Okay,
Thanks. Paul, could you forward that presentation to my email and then we'll get it set up in this room?
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Oh, no, we're sharing screen, so we have to stop sharing. Now, he should be able to share screen and we should be able to see. I apologize, everyone. We can have the best laid plans and have everything we think worked out, and then it doesn't work.
Paul, you should be able to share.
Okay, let me. Just a moment. All right, now my computer's moving slow. Is everyone able to see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for your patience on that. All right.
Thanks, Paul.
well,
It's good.
going
Now it's
to-
available here in our room. Thanks.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you, members of the board. My name is Paul Donegan with Clarion Associates, and we're talking with you today about the update to the subdivision and zoning regulations. We've been able to speak with a few of you already as part of the advisory committee, but we will be presenting to you all throughout the project to sort of keep you updated on the project and provide opportunities for you to provide us input. At this point, we are really on the initial stages, and we'll talk a little bit through that timeline. But we'll start with introductions to our team, a short overview of the project, the current efforts and planned efforts for community outreach, and then some next steps and some opportunities for questions. And then if Elizabeth is able to share, I will start on her slide here.
Great. Can everyone hear me okay?
I can.
Yes, we can hear you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Chair and board members, I'm Elizabeth Garvin. I am a director at Clarion Associates in the Denver office. I am, before that, a Kansas Citian. Grew up in Johnson County and went to University of Kansas. I'm really excited to be working back in the community again, and excited to be working with you in particular in Johnson County with some of the unique issues that come with running a county in a fast growing area. On our team for Clarion Associates, you've heard from Paul Donegan this evening. He's the assistant project manager. He's a senior associate with Clarion. Eliza Blood is with us, and she is one of the newer members of Clarion. She's one of our associates. And Holly White's not with us this evening, but she's our graphics lead, and she'll be helping us come up with a far more detailed and illustrated set of regulations for you to use. We're also really happy to be teamed with Olson Studio in the Kansas City area. So we've got Ken Boone, Taylor Plummer, and Shelby Ferguson on our team. And you'll be seeing Shelby more than anybody. She will be with us and leading in the marketing and outreach efforts on this project. Paul, let's go to the next slide. So just a little bit of background. Often as we get a project started, people are curious, who's Clarion? Why are you here working on our code? And so for about the past 30 years, we have been working on land use regulations and comprehensive plans around the country. And we have a staff of about 20 in our 2 offices. And you can see from the map here, we work just about all over the place. And we like to work in communities where there is a great sense of community, and there are some good issues that we can dive into and help you solve. Our goal is to help you come up with a code that works for Johnson County. You won't see another code that we've done that is exactly the same as yours when we're finished. That's not how our process works. We work with our communities to come up with their more unique code to solve the issues that we were brought in to work on. Let's go to the next slide, Paul. So our teammates, Olson Studio, have extensive experience in Kansas City and the region, north, south, east, and west, working with community outreach. And this is a really kind of a tricky topic when you're doing a zoning code update, because surprisingly, and you guys may well be aware of this on the board, not everybody sits around thinking about zoning all the time. And so we need to bring the community into the process. We need to spend some time educating everybody, providing the information they need to ask questions, and then helping them understand the changes that we'll see in the regulations as we go forward. So we will talk this evening about some of the steps that we're going to take to get the outreach going, and then we will come back to you after we hear from community members or project stakeholders and let you know what we're hearing, and also share drafts with you as we go along. I think I got one more slide, Paul. Nope. Am I switching over to you at this point? I believe I am.
That's right.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, so for the quick overview of the project, we'll talk with you about the scope and the timeline, as Elizabeth alluded to, some of that marketing and outreach, as well as the process of drafting, sort of how we think about going through that process, and also just to give you an idea of what to expect as the project is going forward. We'll talk a little bit about the role of the advisory committee, which some of you are members of, as well as your role in the process, and then some next steps. So for the scope and timeline, we are in this, I guess we're wrapping up the second phase, which is to produce an audit and annotated outline of your code. The key purpose of that is to identify how the regulations are currently working or not working, identifying some of the gaps, and then looking at conflicts in the code. There's always, over time, zoning and subdivision regulations can create issues with overlapping regulations or conflicts with things like building code, that sort of thing. So a big part of this effort will be just to look for those issues and create alignment. And then coming into the next phase, which will be starting imminently, is to start drafting the regulations. For each draft, there's going to be an internal review version that we'll work on with staff to make sure that we're hearing from you all and internal stakeholders, other departments, and what we've heard from the community, and then providing opportunities for the community to provide feedback. So a lot of the documents will be coming out in chunks, and there will be opportunities for the community to see what's going on as the process is going on and to provide feedback. And so there won't necessarily be too much time where you won't be hearing from us as we go through the process. And then the final phase, which will wrap up in the spring of 2026, feels like a long ways off, but it does take time to get through the process to make sure that we're hearing from the community members about what matters to them and making sure that the regulations are written thoroughly, clearly, and are legally sound. And there'll be opportunities for community engagement throughout these phases. Some of the key things that we'll be thinking about through the community engagement process is providing opportunities for people to participate in the ways that make sense to them. Sometimes that's in-person meetings, sometimes that's online surveys. So there will be a variety of different ways for people to participate. We also know that this is a complicated topic area and a process and a project. So making sure that there is a two-way flow of information, that we're providing education on what zoning is, and probably more importantly, what it isn't in some cases, and making sure that folks are able to participate and have a little bit more of an education into what's going on with the zoning and subdivision regulations. A lot of the outreach will be focusing on accessibility so that people can participate throughout the project, and where possible, having it be interactive, which is always an interesting thing to pursue for a zoning code, but making sure it's a little bit more interesting than a bunch of documents that people have to read through. How we'll be getting the word out. We are working on a project webpage that is hosted on the county's website. And that is, the content is ready to go. So it's just sort of a matter of finalizing that. We'll be also having an opportunity for people to subscribe for email updates on the website so that they can participate. We'll also probably be using some of the existing email listservs that the county has to get the word out to the community about what's going on. We'll be using existing county social media by letting people know that are already following the county what's going on. And so you'll be seeing things like social media posts, press releases, hopefully some articles or segments in local news, as well as email blasts. And then also throughout providing a little bit more project information and flyers. That's sort of part of the sort of getting the word out and education towards the community. There's going to be a lot of people involved in the project. In addition to the Board of County Commissioners, the Planning Commission will be involved. You all in the Zoning Board, as well as the West Zoning Board, will be involved. We also have an advisory committee. Some of you all are involved in that. There's also other planning commissioners and county residents that are participating. And then we have a project team, which includes the planning staff and this consultant team, but we'll also be coordinating pretty closely with a lot of the other departments who deal with the subdivision and zoning regulations. We've already done a lot of these kickoff meetings. You all are actually our second to last, with the other zoning board being the final kickoff meeting. Outside of that, we're hosting stakeholder and focus group meetings where we'll be meeting either in small groups or one-on-one with people that are involved in development, zoning, have issues or topics that they care a lot about, whether that has to do with open space, agriculture, recreation, environmental issues, as well as development. And so hopefully getting a good segment of the community to participate through that. We've done our first advisory group meeting, and we'll be looking at doing some public meetings, probably as part of the rollout of the code assessment and audit later this fall. For events, there will be more advisory group meetings and public meetings throughout the process. We will generally coincide those with deliverables. So the first major deliverable being the code assessment and audit. But throughout the project, there will be small chunks of the full code that will come out in drafts, and we'll be providing opportunities for review and feedback from the community. And then later on in the process, there's going to be a lot of meetings that will allow us to maybe talk a little bit more deeply about the topics, resolve issues that come up. The thing about the drafting process is there's not going to be a sort of deliverable or draft that comes out that doesn't change based on what we hear from the community, you all, the Planning Commission, the Board of County Commissioners, and then at the end, going through the public hearing process with the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners. So lots of opportunities for people to participate. In terms of what's coming up next, you all are our second to last zoning board meeting, as I mentioned, but also the West Zoning Board will be meeting with them later this month at their scheduled meeting. And then we'll be looking at some of these stakeholder and focus meetings that I had mentioned before. Here's some of the groups that we're thinking about talking with, some of the topics that come up regularly. So let's dive in on a little bit about what the project is. So updating a zoning code. These are maybe some of the key things we've heard through the project already. That have sort of been honed into some of the goals of the project. I think first and foremost, we've heard that there's a lot of work that's been put into the Rural Comprehensive Plan, as well as other plans and policies. And so a big part of updating your zoning and subdivision regulations is making sure that we're implementing the plan. And we've heard a few situations where there's a need for greater coordination between what the plan is saying should happen in terms of growth and development in the future and what's been happening. So I think there's an opportunity to increase that alignment. We really want to improve the user friendliness. That has to do with, clear, simple, non-legal language, as well as graphics, tables, flowcharts, things to make it a lot easier for folks to approach the zoning code, whether they're a seasoned developer or just somebody trying to do a small accessory building on their site. I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about modernizing the zoning and subdivision regulations, but a lot of that has to do with focusing on removing regulations that are getting in the way of development that the community wants. Looking for where there's gaps in regulations, where development is occurring that's creating problems, and that there might be a need for some targeted updates to how the county regulates those. We want to make sure that the regulations are reflecting modern development methods. The code has been around for a long time, and I think there are areas where we have heard that it is working well, and so we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Keeping the things that work well, but then also making sure that we're, preparing the county for what currently is being proposed in terms of different land uses or types of development, and making sure those are tied to infrastructure capacity, which we know is a major limitation in the unincorporated areas of Johnson County. We want to make sure that there's a mix of predictability and flexibility. We want people to be able to know what's going to happen near them in terms of development. We want people that are putting in applications for development to know what the process will be like. But we also know that there are an infinite number of potential issues and challenges that come up through a development process. And so we want to make sure that the updated zoning and subdivision regulations have flexibility so that there can be some adjustment to the standards that reflect on the ground realities. I talked already a little bit about the reducing conflicts and inconsistencies. We definitely want to incorporate best practices. We do not only a lot of work in Kansas, but around the nation in rural but urbanizing counties. And so dealing with a lot of the growth pressures that you all deal with. So we have some best practices that we know of, but we also know that every community is different. And so the updated zoning code needs to be tailored to Johnson County and the realities on the ground. So, and then certainly legally sound and defensible so that you all are complying with state statutes and federal law and not running into a bunch of lawsuits. What it means to implement the plan. You guys have quite a bit of policy language and guiding information, whether that's maps, a land use vision statement, the land use plan, the planning framework, which provides 10 points of guidance towards future development in Johnson County. So there's a lot there, and I think the intention is to implement that policy and obviously provide opportunities throughout the process where is maybe a need for clarity on what a policy means, how the county needs to implement it, having those conversations. But we don't want to start from scratch in terms of implementing your planning work that's already been done. For modernizing the regulations, we'll be looking at updating the structure and organization of the code so that like information is with like information. And people don't have to flip through the code in order to find all the information. You all working on a zoning board probably know that better than most folks because of your familiarity with the code. So we want to just make that process easy so that people know where to find information based on the structure and organization. We want standards that reflect modern development types. I've already talked about that. We want to make sure that the infrastructure is tied to what is allowed in terms of land use and development. Where there's regulatory gaps, we want to make sure that we're not leaving you all at risk of some new development showing up and not being prepared for it. I've already talked about the predictability and flexibility. We want to make sure that the code is sort of tailored to work across unique settings because you have some very, very rural areas. You have some sort of they're unincorporated, but they have sort of some community centers. I'm thinking of the Stillwell and Blue Valley area that you guys are most familiar with, but making sure that there's, the code is able to work in those areas as well. And then making sure we're really focusing regulations on the things that matter most to the community and not just having regulations there for the purpose of regulating things that aren't important to the county. From a user friendliness perspective, some of the ways we like to do that is with things like graphics. Maybe a zoning district can include a purpose statement that describes what type of development makes sense in a zoning district, the dimensional standards, some tables to show the information in a little bit more organized and graphic way, whether that has to do with the district standards or maybe the development review process. Who sees what types of application and what's the timing of those and how does somebody get through the process? Who's reviewing? Who's making decisions? How do I appeal a decision? Putting that information right into the code, I think will be a big improvement, certainly for you all on the zoning board. So what are some of the things we've heard so far? So we're coming to the end of this round of updates to kick off the project. We've heard sort of that, like everywhere in the Kansas City region, that housing has become very expensive and that there's a lot of interest in more affordable housing. But we know that there are a lot of infrastructure limitations on what can happen in the county. And so I think that's one of the challenges is that you guys have some infrastructure limitations. And so I think making sure that we're articulating that to the community, letting them know that, in terms of affordable housing, some of the things that you're already doing in terms of allowing accessory dwelling units is really one of the best tools that you guys have available to you. The other thing is that you have a lot of unique communities. We talked already about the Stillwell area, but there's some very unique contexts, and so making sure that we don't have a one size fits all code, I think will be really important to making sure we're responding to what we've heard so far on that front. there's a lot of interest in different regulations that you guys don't necessarily have a lot of insight into right now in the code. We heard a little bit about a dark sky ordinance and improved lighting standards. How can we deal with CUPs in a little bit of a different way so that people can get through that conditional use permit process fast and efficiently, and we're not necessarily creating barriers to things that the county wants to see. And at the same time, if there's something that makes sense in the county, as long as it has the right standards and it's meeting the right standards, then I think allowing things in a more conditional use. We've already heard quite a bit from community members, and we know that folks are quite passionate about the community and have a lot of love for Johnson County, and we think that's a strength that will help draw a lot of participation. We know that there's some lack of alignment right now between the zoning and subdivision regulations and the comp plan, as well as sort of those plans for the rural roads and other infrastructure. So we want to make sure we're addressing that challenge. There's challenges, I think, right now with the procedures and how people get through the zoning process, making sure that that's a little bit more clear, and then making sure that we're also addressing the need for different types of housing in a rural context. And I think that's just sort of an important thing to hit home, is that we'll be looking at how we can address some of the policy issues in the plan, but making sure that it's fit for a rural context like you have. So coming up, I mentioned the project website on the county or the project webpage on the county's website. We'll be meeting with the West Zoning Board later this month. Also this month, we'll be coming out with the zoning code audit and annotated outline. That'll give you a good picture of sort of the key challenges as we see it in the code and some of our proposals for how to change that going forward. It can be helpful because this is sort of a kickoff conversation of like, what is this project? That can be really helpful to give people something to react to, because I think it's hard for people to know exactly what feedback they have until they see what proposals are out there. So that'll be really important to come forward this month. We'll be doing an advisory committee meeting based on that, as well as providing the public opportunities to comment on that. And you all will also have the opportunity to comment on that using sort of an interactive online format. And then also later this month, internally, we're going to be working on this first segment module of the updated code, and that's looking at zoning districts and uses. And so we're working on that and preparing to work on that based on the feedback we get on the code audit. With that, I am happy to take questions based on the presentation and any other questions you have about the project.
Yeah, this is Kelly Rass. I have a question, Paul. I'm on the advisory committee as well as the planning commission, but unfortunately I was absent for the first meetings last month. So I apologize if this has been asked or explained, but could you, when we're looking at phase 2, because it seems like from my understanding, that was the first meeting was last month with the advisory, correct? So we're just kind of getting started, but
Yeah,
under,
go ahead.
go ahead. Okay.
Okay.
Anyways, but under phase 2, it seems like we're finishing up, and phase 2 seems pretty important as far as identifying, all the issues, what doesn't work, what does work, flagging conflicts, locating gaps. Can you just give a little backstory of where all this information that you have accumulated at this point to know all of that at this point, since the advisory committee has kind of just gotten started? Or is this like a fluid thing that continues to go on through the other phases as well? Because that seems like important information is to identify what's working and what's not working.
Definitely. No, I agree. It is definitely a somewhat fluid process in terms of, we'll be finding out information throughout the project based on feedback that we hear from the community and you all. And so I think there won't necessarily be this, one report that says, here's everything that's going to happen and we're going to, power forward through it. I think this sort of initial phase can be a little bit tricky in that it's both an introduction to the project, and then we know it's really hard to provide feedback sometimes without having something to look at and react to. And so this second phase is kind of coming up with some preliminary recommendations based on our own review of the code, looking at it and seeing what looks confusing or outdated or it might be challenging. A lot of that's based on what we hear from staff and the advisory committee and folks like you sort of saying, hey, keep having issues with this type of application. We would really like to deal with this type of land use, or I don't know why we aren't able to handle this specific issue, and being able to give you guys something to react to can be helpful, but it's definitely not the end of that conversation. I definitely don't want to, give you the impression that there won't be a lot more conversation, because as you noted, we're really just scratching the surface of getting to know what the county is having in terms of challenges and opportunities that they want to pursue.
Okay, so Kelly Raskin, so just to confirm or reiterate what you said, a lot of your information came from the advisory meeting that was just recently had, staff, and then you guys reviewing the current code as it stands. Is that correct? Because in the last slide too, it said that there had already been, substantial information that's already been, recommended and stuff. So I'm just trying to wonder where these recommendations have already come, because I was under the impression last month we were just getting started. So it seems like a lot has already transpired as far as the identifying what needs to be done and stuff. So that's why I was just getting a little backstory. But if it's more fluid and more opportunities to discuss those things and know where this information is coming from, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Paul, this is Fred Wingert. Have you looked at what percentage of Johnson County is unincorporated?
Yes.
Of land use?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we've been looking not just at that incorporated versus unincorporated, but also what the zoning is in the unincorporated area, and seeing, you guys currently have a large amount of zoning districts, but for the most part, things are falling within those larger lot rural agricultural districts.
In terms of the total land mass of Johnson County, I think it's maybe like 450 square acres or something like that, or square miles, I'm sorry. Isn't it like 35% unincorporated? Does that sound right?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but that does sound about right.
Okay.
Mr. Winger, Jay Leipzig, that's about correct. It's
About
37%.
37.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, close to 33%. Yeah.
And I think we have like 20 municipalities that are in Johnson County. So what makes it unique, and the reason for the question is that this board, the people that live in Stillwell referenced before, and the people live in the West District, we make up 36% of the unincorporated area, yet we have, a governing body that has representation from the 20 municipalities. So I guess as you're formulating this plan, how do you balance that between what the people that live in unincorporated versus you're ultimately accountable to the board, I guess, the Board of County Commissioners. So how do you weigh that in putting together a comprehensive plan?
Paul, can I take that one?
Yeah.
This is Elizabeth Garvin from Clarion Associates. So I'm just going to back us up a little bit. We're not doing a comprehensive plan. We're updating the zoning and subdivision regulations that are specifically applicable to the unincorporated county. So we aren't going to have to do any overlap with the municipalities within the county. They all have their own zoning and subdivision regulations.
Okay, so as you put together the updated zoning and subdivision regulations, where does the will of the people that are living in the 36% of Johnson County, where does that intersect with the folks that, that are on the board making the decision? How do you weigh that?
So what we do to update the regulations is we look to the county's comprehensive plan, which is focused specifically on the unincorporated areas. And our goal isn't to make new policy, it's to take existing policy that's been adopted by the Board of County Commissioners and reference that throughout the regulations. So the development that takes place in the county over time reflects what you all have already adopted as a comprehensive plan.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Are you, so there, I noticed on the original map, there was planning, you had some areas you'd done planning and other areas you'd done zoning and land use. So this would be considered zoning and land use? Because that's how you.
That's correct.
Zoning and land use. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I can, speak for what I think our board has wrestled with. I've been on the board for maybe 3 to 4 years. And, I think our driving concern is projects that do not fit in unincorporated Johnson County continue to come on a regular basis. So great example is a soccer complex that I would estimate 85, 89, 90% of the residents of Stillwell didn't want. And we all voted against it, and yet it came anyway. There was a racetrack proposed before that. And I think the feeling of this board pretty unanimously was, I wasn't on the board when it was approved, but those are the kind of things I'm interested in seeing, that the citizens in unincorporated Johnson County are protected from, that people have chose to live in unincorporated Johnson County for a reason. So we could have lived in Overland Park or Leawood or Prairie Village, but we've chosen to live in, in this area. And it seems like there's, I'm gonna speak for myself, and the board, this board has struggled with those, those projects. So whatever we can do to protect the residents that want to preserve unincorporated Johnson County for what it is, that would be, to me, overriding concern, and what I'd like to see included in the regulations that just hasn't, really been there thus far.
Yeah. So can you just, without getting in too deep, what tied your hands on the soccer fields? Why did you think that shouldn't have been approved and it got approved?
There was inadequate infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
It was a massive invasion of traffic into an area that, it wasn't an appropriate location. The hours of operation weren't appropriate. This board voted unanimously against it. We went to the board, came back to us. We, made some, a few considerations, sent it back, and were totally overridden by the Board of County Commissioners. The lighting in particular was a concern. The size and scope of the project was way, way excessive for the property that it's on. The racetrack, I mean, it has a whole different, set of concerns that the residents had. And it did not feel like the residents in Stillwell were, at all, protected considerations. It was, the will of the board was kind of slammed down on the residents that clearly, with, general, I think this board, general disregard for our comments, our concerns. And, that at the end of the day, it's, the board can do whatever they want, but, they don't live there. And, the idea, and I think in representation, is that local representation should make decisions about what happens in an area. And what's unique is that you have people voting that, don't live, ultimately don't live in this area. So we make recommendations, but it doesn't seem like our recommendations really matter.
Thank you. So, okay, so that helps us better understand the full picture of what you were describing and the concern about the board making decisions that are different than what you guys were recommending on. I appreciate you spending that time explaining. Thank you.
Yes, and this is Kelly Ross. I'll touch on one. I think the hardest thing for me is Stillwell has its own development plan. So anybody who has come in front of the board, zoning board for a CUP has had to follow the Stillwell lighting codes, which is basically nothing above 18 feet, I believe. And the soccer complex has come in now with 3 fields with 70-foot lighting structure. So it's totally blown the Stillwell development plan, which was a legally adopted document, out of the water. So in my opinion now, it's like, where do we stand for anybody else now coming in and saying, oh, you can't have that, or you have to abide by the Stillwell lighting guidelines when this has been approved and it's, grossly 10 times what is stated, or like all the people before us that were like, okay, yes, maybe that's not what they wanted to do, but they did it because that's what was necessary or what they thought would be necessary to get their CUP, and also to be reasonable, understanding they were going into Stillwell and Stillwell had this design plan. So that's what's been kind of the big thing to me. I'm all about, I feel like residents should have transparency. They should know what's going to take place. They should know what they're going to be up against. And if they move into an area where they're going to be next to an open lot and it's, game on for everything, well, that's sort of on them. But if we have certain regulations that, sort of protect that, where you would never expect something like that to land, that doesn't seem to be being taken in consideration anymore. And to me, as a member on these boards now, it gets very difficult. How do you approve one thing versus another? So, or not only that, even the CUPs that continue to morph, from one meeting to another, where it gets approved and then they change it and you can't address the whole thing anymore, only the new component of the CUP, which kind of ties your hand, because it's like, well, maybe I would have done something a little bit different, but you can't address what's already been passed, only what's in front of you now with the new CUP. So those are some of the things that I think we're trying to protect our citizens and our residents. And I think it needs to be defined in regulations, because I don't think our, commissioners and stuff are listening to the voice of the residents as far as concerns. They're just doing, what they want. So somewhere there's got to be some sort of protection, like what I think Fred was trying to bring up. Thank you.
This is Elizabeth Garvin again. So Board Member Rass, thank you. The information that you all are sharing with us is part of what Paul was talking about earlier, that we do have this kind of back and forth iterative conversation about what's going on with the codes and what goes on with people who use the codes or who rely on the zoning and subdivision regulations. So we will wrap the information you all are sharing into the code assessment as we get it out the door here fairly quickly, and then assure you that, as Paul said, it's a jumping off point for this conversation. And we do want to dig deeper and learn the things that you're sharing with us this evening and see how we can pull all those pieces in place and address some of the concerns, even like the practical day-to-day concerns that you just touched on, like how do I do something that appears to be inconsistent decision-making when I had one project go through and I want to say, another one is non-compliance. And so those are all the practical pieces and the regulatory pieces that we'll be working through in the process. And we thank you for sharing that with us.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment? This is Jay Leipzig. I was just going to say, I appreciate the comments from Commissioner Rast and Winger. Those are they're very good observations. I think and I appreciate that. I think that the benefit of having a consultant like this is that's worked all over the country, is familiar with either the land patterns that we're talking about, the development patterns, they're able to put together those best practices for zoning districts. And I think that's the piece that we need to get some clarification on and to be able to provide for us so that we have stronger CUP requirements, application submittal requirements, and there's a better groundwork for that review, these applications. But I think, yeah, that really is the advantage of using a consultant. It's getting those best practices. The other piece of it is taking these regulations and putting them together so they fit together properly. Paul alluded to that, where there's parts that they're almost circular. They tend to, there's some overlapping. It's difficult to find certain pieces of it in the code. There are different sections. It appears, if it just picking it up like it's disorganized, but it was very intentional at the time. But as we've updated it and we've had continued development, we've kind of gradually lost some of that. So we're hoping to, look at a real comprehensive update with everything so it fits together. And then we have a very, as you said, flexibility and predictability are the keys for developments. They come in, developers know exactly what they need to do. Staff is able to review it and also provide clear guidelines for the board, for the zoning board, as well as the board of county commissioners too, when they review it. So.
Very
Yes.
good.
Oh,
Very good.
ahead.
If I might interject something here. This is Rod Richardson, Vice Chair. I know this is in a work in process, and I don't think obviously it's not our purpose to relitigate, so to speak, all the past problems we've encountered here. But I want to make an observation, a personal observation about what this consultant is going to do. And I do that based on spending 50 years in the zoning and land use business and serving on this board for 20 some odd years and getting presenting a lot of these applications on the other side of the desk. There is one issue that if this consultant fails to address will render their work extremely, shall we say, less than what we would hope for. And that's one of the reasons I said I want somehow this board to have the opportunity to acquaint the consultant with the concerns that we're facing. But to me, where this all breaks down, and you can look at this 1,000 different ways, but when it comes to this board's recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, where we have a significant problem, I believe, is that there is a general inadequacy, if not outright failure, of applicants and staff to fully, thoroughly identify the negative impacts that these proposed uses, conditional use permits or otherwise, bring to the adjoining landowners in the community. Every time we've had one of these, whether it's a racetrack or it's a soccer stadium, or it all boils down to what are the negative impacts, the adverse impacts. I think this code needs to, at least in their recommendations, need to really look very hard at placing a positive requirement on every applicant to use their best efforts, best practices, if you want to use your word, to identify the potential negative impacts from things such as lighting, noise, odor, vibrations, glare, all the things are already talked about in the code, but which fail to recognize that those impacts in a sparsely populated rural area, such as the unincorporated area, have significantly greater harmful effects than they would in the middle of Overland Park. So if this consultant is looking at what they need to do here to address some of these concerns, they're going to have to take their Overland Park or Kansas City hat or Denver hat off and recognize that a noise standard, for example, that might be applicable in Overland Park, that if it's over, and I'll just make this up, but over 75 decibels at the property line is too much. 75 decibels in downtown Overland Park is not necessarily objectionable, but it would be highly objectionable out here in the country. The same is true with lighting. Lighting in the midst of other lighting is not going to be particularly noticeable in the city. It's going to be dreadfully noticeable out here. The same is true with odors, vibrations, glare, etc. So when this consultant, obviously a highly qualified consultant, is looking at these things, if this plan does not squarely address how these particular standards need to be modified and explained in terms of the context of the area that they're being applied. The lighting standards can't just be common for Overland Park or Kansas City. They're going to have to be tailored to recognize the unincorporated area. The same for noise. For example, the noise standards really are just a decibel standard when what they really ought to be is a standard that says, look, at midnight on a nice spring evening, the decibel level taken at the property line is 10 decibels. What is your use going to do to raise that above 10 decibels? In other words, what's the net change to the lighting? What's the net change to the noise, to the odor, to the vibration, to the glare? Not against a standard that is arbitrary, pick 75, pick X lumens, or pick whatever you measure odor with. It's got to be in the context of the unincorporated area. So that's really the extent of my comments. I think this consultant's report will be heavily criticized, certainly by this board, and I would assume anybody else that's thinking about it, including staff, if the standards that are applied ultimately in the zoning and development code don't recognize that when we're developing out in these areas, there has to be very significant consideration given to the fact that this is not in a city, this is an unincorporated area where these impacts have much greater consequence. And I can guarantee you that despite all the examples we've given, or the ones that Mr. Leipzig talked about, or anyone where we've had conflict, it's over just these issues. And I think people, come out here and they want to bar the development of soccer stadiums or whatever the case may be. They want to stop it. It's terrible. They miss the point that there's really nothing inherently wrong with a soccer stadium. It's the negative impacts from the soccer stadium that are a problem. You've got to identify those negative impacts within the context of the rural area they're in, then determine if they can be mitigated to a reasonable degree where any reasonable person would say that's sufficient, or whether they can't, in which case the use probably shouldn't be approved. That's where this code breaks down. I mean, most of it I think is probably pretty good, but in that area, and the unincorporated area, is where you really need to focus your spotlight. And if you don't do that, you're not going to solve or help us solve, or our residents solve, the concerns they have. And also put the onus on the developer. By the way, you're a stranger to us. You want to come in, you want permission to develop this. Guess what? The burden of proof is on you to ID the negative impacts, show us how you're going to mitigate them, and let us determine if we believe as a recommending body you've done a good enough job before we recommend approval or not. So when I look at this, and I'm just one person here, but when I look at that, that's what I'm going to be looking at, how that works. Everything else you do is going to be subordinate, quite frankly, in my view, to how well you address that issue. So I just wanted to convey that because it may be the only chance I have to say it. So that's it. So that's my comment for you, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Rass. I totally echo what Vice Chair Richardson said. But and the other component you might want to think about to throw in is the issue with a commercial business on a rural resident zoned lot, because that's been our struggles too, is these commercial businesses wanting to set up, whether it's, a private baseball, well, it's a commercial business, 6-figure profitable business, so it's a large business, or the soccer, it's a commercial business, but they might be on rural residential. So that might be an area to be defined to help us sort out, or keep these businesses away from residents in neighborhoods and stuff that just, increases traffic, noise, whatever. So just a little food for thought. Thank you.
This is Elizabeth Garvin again. May I reply, if that's okay?
Please do.
Thanks. Vice Chair Richardson and Commissioner Rast, first, just want to assure you that we have written county codes, and we know that a county is not just a city with fewer people. It is a very different animal. We did the Riley County Code, and we are currently doing a number of counties out here in Colorado and in other locations. So we hear what you're saying. I would ask you a question. In terms of, measuring impacts of potential development on neighboring properties, what we don't want to do is set up a vacuum where, you are in a position of weighing each one individually. We do want some effective standards in the regulations. We certainly don't use arbitrary numbers in our standards. We, look to see the issue that we're solving and set those standards appropriately, be that noise or, anything else if we're doing performance standards like that. But, one of the things that we're hearing from staff is those are all places where the current code could be updated to reflect modern development. And it sounds like there may be conflict between what's in the regulations and the size and scale of development that's being proposed in the county. You know, I hear you, what you're saying. We need to not bring you anything from Overland Park, which is absolutely fine. They've got their own regulations, but we will want to work with you to set standards in the right place. Has it been your experience that the standards in the code aren't getting you there?
I'm sorry, say that again. They aren't what?
The standards in the code right now are insufficient against which to measure development. So the staff report isn't helpful, or you all are trying to figure out how to get your arms around a larger development that you wouldn't otherwise see in the code just doesn't have enough in it to help you.
Well, this is Rod Richardson. I'll provide my answer for what, and then the other members can comment, but I'll just give you an example because we're defining a very narrow area, but it's a very important one, much more so, I think, than anything else. And that is, for example, if I'm a developer of a soccer stadium, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the standards in the code to see how far I can go without violating those standards before I have to ask for some variance in that standard. So when they look at that, at the current standards, they see whatever the specified standards are really aren't designed, in my opinion anyway, to reflect the rural area in which those standards are being applied. The problem you have as the consultant is just what you identified, is how do we modify the standards so that when a developer looks at it, for example, we'll just take the soccer stadium. Any developer that, to me, that wanted to build a soccer stadium in this location should have been looking at standards that would have said, this is probably a bad idea because we're not probably going to be able to meet those standards unless we meet the dark sky standards, then we might have a shot at it. The standards for lighting, for example, were simply too liberal for any developer to look at and to really be motivated to try to protect the darkness. To suggest 70-foot light standards where there's a local plan that already addressed these issues and set 18-foot standards, but yet they end up with 70-foot standards. Even if they do the dark sky lighting is going to be a problem. So, I don't want to beat the soccer stadium to death, but it's a useful example to demonstrate the problem. When any developer comes in, the standards you propose for this, they're going to, I don't know, I couldn't tell you exactly how to craft them because I'm not an expert in lighting or noise or whatever, but they need to recognize the inherent darkness of the area they're going to put it in, not an arbitrary standard for how bright something should be before it becomes a nuisance. They need to recognize how quiet the area is before they talk about, how many decibels will be irritating. They need to talk about, what other odors, industrial odors, whatever, in the area before they start applying a particular standard or vibration. In other words, to just make it simple, there is an abject failure to recognize the character and quality of the area they want to put the development in, when they want to stick them in here, and the standards that we currently have don't do a very good job, in my opinion, of forcing the developers to say, now look, this pitch black out there, you want to put a soccer stadium, their residences over here, it's going to have a dramatic impact here where it wouldn't in Overland Park if it was in a heavily lit area. And the same would apply to particularly light and noise. Those are the two biggies right there more than anything else. So I'm not sure how you're going to approach it. That's where you get the big bucks. But from our point of view, that's the problem we have now. We need to put something that tells the developers that want to do this or those that want a conditional use permit, look, you cannot simply come in and propose this without understanding the nature and character of the area. You're a guest here. You're going to have to modify your development or give it up if it's going to be too big of a problem for the area. And these standards need to help the community protect the existing uses rather than be an open invitation to adverse uses, which can't really be reasonably mitigated. And, there's no magic answer to how you do that. I'm not suggesting one, but what we have now needs to be very closely looked at for just that problem. And that's the best answer I can give you from my personal experience.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Rast. I would echo that. That was also why I was asking about phase 2, because I look at the legally adopted Stillwell community plan that up until the soccer field, everybody had to follow the lighting that was in that plan. But now the soccer field just out of the blue does not have to. So to me, that's a flagging of conflicts, under your phase 2, locating gaps, just the inconsistency. So that's why I bring that up, as well as having commercial businesses set up on rural residential. But the other thing that I feel like I struggle with sometimes are golden criteria. What one person, I think they can be very subjective. What one person feels like it fits the area or doesn't bother them becomes more of a subjective thing, where the other person is like, no, I don't see that at all. So I don't know if that, and that's where we run into trouble. And then it also just seems like decisions are made without rationale of saying, like what Rod was saying, that this absolutely fits under this category, check this box, it does this, it does that. And that just has not been going on. And, honestly, my personal feedback is we're about 6 to 9 months a little late starting this project, because I'm not really sure how we deal with what has already been passed and has kind of screwed everything up. But anyway, so that's the issue at hand. Thank you.
This is Fred Wingert. The Dark Sky Initiative, how I assume you're familiar with it. How could it be incorporated into our current zoning regulations?
This is Elizabeth again, Elizabeth Garvin. Sorry, I'm going to answer your question with a question because off the top of my head, I don't know how far your current code goes into dark skies regulations. Typically there are a couple different variations we can do of bringing the lighting into more focus and reducing the glare and reducing lighting trespass without going all the way into dark skies, which has its own sort of administration process. But if that is a place that the county wants to go, we've certainly done full dark skies regulations for other communities. And so part of what we would normally do is, take a look at the differences in the regulations and the impacts they have on lighting trespass and lighting glare, and figure out what the right place is going to be for Johnson County in terms of level of regulation.
Thank you for that. Is there, Fred Wingert again, is there an equivalent with noise? Rod, Commissioner, mentioned that noise and vibration and things like that. Is there a dark sky equivalent for impact that noise would have?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. This is Elizabeth Garvin again, and I think it's an interesting question. What we typically see are individual noise ordinances in communities. So, it could be that we want to take a look at what the county's got in the noise standards and adjust. Certainly what we find in older codes is usually, because the way codes were written, there's a lot of cut and paste from other regional codes. There are a lot of standards that aren't tailored to a county. So they would be something that would be more one size fits all. Whereas we might want to say, if you're building adjacent to one of the cities, we're going to have a noise level here. If you're definitely out in the county, we're going to set that noise level lower. So one of the things we think we need to do within this code update is figure out those areas that, where the impacts are most easily felt, as I think as Vice Chair Richardson was saying, and set standards appropriately there that may be different from standards in other locations. And that would be something, we would work with staff and you and our advisory committee to figure out where those gradations should be. So long answer to your question. I'll go see if there's a quiet society out there, if they have any standards for us. It's not something I've come across before, but you never know. So we'll go look, but if not, then we will come in and work with the tools we have at hand and see how we can adjust them appropriately.
Vice Chair Richardson.
Yes.
Chair Leipzig, if I could just say a
Mr.
couple of
Leipzig.
comments. I just wanted to mention, I think I appreciate the great comments tonight, and certainly this is all part of that record as well. So we're going to include these, talk about this with staff and then with a consultant as well. The next step, is to look at that in discussion with the advisory committee, and offhand, performance standards, whatever you want to call them, in terms of whether it's lighting or noise or whatever. I do think that having the best practices to look at zoning districts that have particular requirements for those type of things, modern requirements, especially for lighting, as you said, noise, our infrastructure requirements as well are all part of that. They all have to fit together. But yeah, great comments tonight. We'll certainly take these and have a lot of discussion about that, I assure you, with the advisory committee, and we'll be bringing back updates to you as well as we move forward.
Well, I do think, and we need to move on to get to our applicant who's been sitting patiently there. And we get to them pretty quick, close out any other comments we may have here. But I do think I wanted the consultant to realize that, we don't know for sure when we'll get a chance to make sure we don't get in a position of having the consultant or anybody else say, well, gee, I wish you'd have told us that earlier so we could have thought about it. I think you probably heard tonight the really the guts of what our concerns are. So I think the consultant's been, tapped on the shoulder sufficiently. I think they get the idea. They're professionals. They understand what we're concerned about, of putting a square peg in a round hole is really what it comes down to. And whether you can file the square edges off enough to make it fit in the community. So we'll look forward to what they do. Mr. Winger, did you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, Fred Wingerton. Just last comment. So, I think a big question is, why? What's the why behind this? So, the incidence right now of autism spectrum disorder, the numbers are staggering. They're increasing. The board of Johnson County Board of Commissioners is very concerned about, mental health and people with disabilities. And so people specifically move to communities that are unincorporated because they have children or they have adult children that have issues with lighting, noise, other distractions. We even have a park in Stillwell dedicated for kids with special needs. So I think there's the why behind this, other than, just a bunch of people that don't want anything in their backyard. I think people have made decisions to move their family to unincorporated areas in some cases because of personal situations. And that's where, the conflict comes here is, that they're not in Overland Park or Olathe because of, health concerns. And that's not everybody, but I know many families in the Stillwell area that attend Stillwell Elementary have kids with special needs. And that's part of the reason they live in Stillwell.
Any other comments? All right, hearing none, I hope the consultant has benefited from this. I know we have cathartic experience to get to say this again, and I know we'll look at it, but I would ask this chairman, this Vice Chair Richardson, to the consultant, before I close this out and we move on to the business, do you have anything else you would like to ask us as this board tonight before we close out your excellent presentation?
Mr. Vice Chair, this is Elizabeth Garvin again. Not this evening. We know that you have applicants waiting, and we have a longer time horizon than they do. We appreciate everything that you shared with us this evening. It gets us a little deeper into the issues that we'll be resolving, and we will be likely playing 20 questions with you again as we give you updates across the life of the project and hear from your representatives on the advisory committee. We're really looking forward to digging into this project with everybody.
Well, thank you very much. And unless staff or Jay have any other questions, I'll close this part out. And thank you very much for taking your time to be with us. Very helpful to us and hopefully helpful to you as well. All right. The next item is business before the board. I believe we need a motion to continue these two applications. So I would entertain a motion to continue application number E24-414-PP and E24-412-FP, preliminary and final plat near Metcalf at 210th East side of Floyd, to the December 4th, 2024 meeting.
Fred Wingert, so moved.
Kelly Rast, second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's been continued. The second item is I would entertain a motion to continue application number E24-415-PDP and E24-413-FDPAU, preliminary and final development plan near Metcalf and 210th East side of Floyd, to December 4th, 2024.
So moved.
Kelly Rast, second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Carries. It'll be continued to December 4th, 2024. That brings us to the active application this evening. Application number E24-428-CUPAU, a conditional use permit for 6946 West 207th Street. I understand Mr. Ubben is presenting, or one who's presenting?
This
You're
is
presenting
Karen
for
Miller.
staff.
I'll present first.
All right, so this would be the planning office presentation. So you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Karen Miller. This is a request for a renewal of a conditional use permit to allow continued use of an outdoor storage yard in association with the construction contractor office and shop. Combs Construction is a commercial general contracting business that operates primarily within Johnson County. This renewal will include expansion of the storage yard from about 20,000 square feet to about 38,000 square feet. The first conditional use permit was approved in 2014 for a term of 10 years. The underlying PEC3 district allows general contractors, but requires a conditional use permit for associated outdoor storage. As you can see by this graphic, the subject property is located to the northeast corner of 207th Street and Metcalf Avenue. Here's an aerial of the property. Access to the site is from 207th Street, which dead ends at the railroad track to the east. You can see the footprint of the paved parking lot right here. And then the 6,000 square foot office, shop, and storage with that also has a 2,400 square foot second story. And then behind the office building is the existing storage yard. And in red, you can see the proposed storage lot expansion. An important issue to note is that the storage yard and its expansion will be very heavily screened. It will be screened by the existing building to the south of the storage yard, railroad tracks to the east. It's completely surrounded by heavy vegetation. The storage yard will be surrounded by a 6-foot wood privacy fence, and the structures and yard have a significant setback from Metcalf. I think it's about 400 or 500 feet. So for this type of development, this is very well screened for the area. Here's another close-up of the contractor office, shop, and yard. And then here is the front elevation of the existing office and shop. That was a look at the subject property. Now for a look at the surrounding zoning and uses. Griffin Industrial Park is to the north. That has many established businesses that have been there for a very long time. For example, Kansas Asphalt, and then also several others. Then we also see Metcalf 207 and Metcalf 211 to the southwest. If you'll remember, not too long ago in Metcalf 207, this board considered a renewal and a revision of the Emery Sapp and Sons contractor shop, office, and yard. Also, there are 2 other longtime contractor yards and shops within this area. And then across the railroad track and to the south of Metcalf 207 is Metcalf 211, and that has several established landscape contractors. So within the area, there is a lot of industrial parks. And then the next thing to consider would be the surrounding zoning. Here's the zoning map of nearby properties, which here's the subject property, and PEC 3 is a type of industrial zoning, and it's shown in purple, and you'll notice all of the purple within the area. And then there's a few vacant parcels of RUR zoning also within the area. So these graphics are examples of planning's analysis of the application with respect to the golden land use criteria. The staff report contains that entire review. Based upon this and the other things in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit request for reasons which include that the site is surrounded by industrial zoning, industrial developments, including several construction contractors. The use is compatible with the industrial character of the neighborhood. The extent of the detrimental effects of this use will be minimal and will be offset by screening, which includes dense vegetation, privacy fencing, and location on the site. Staff also recommends stipulations of approval, including a 20-year term, which is very similar to the other surrounding contractor yards. And also, we recommend stipulations addressing lighting, stormwater maintenance of fencing and landscaping, hours of operation, dust control, and other items. Also, as a note, the infrastructure serving the site was considered with previous applications. It was again reviewed by staff and continues to be suitable for this use. And lastly, if you choose to use it, here's a suggested motion. And I have to apologize, I forgot to put a suggested motion in your staff report. So this would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Any questions of staff?
Kelly Rast, I'm assuming there's been no issues, complaints over the last.
No complaints that overall, and then also I have not been contacted by the public with specific questions about this application.
Okay, thank you.
Fred Wingert, has the current applicant been in this location for like the CUP from 2019? Were they, or
since,
changed?
yeah.
They were the ones that requested that too?
Mr. Combs is here today, and yes, he's the one that established the business, and he's been there ever since.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Any other questions of the staff of Ms. Miller? If not, thank you very much for that. The next item, if they wish to do so, is an applicant presentation. You're welcome to give us your thoughts on this. Identify yourself if you would.
Yep. Good evening, Doug Open with Phelps Engineering. Like I said, Brian Combs, Come Construction here with me.
Karen did a great job of outlining what's going on here with the CP request for some additional storage area. So I feel like it's compatible with the area, the surroundings, screened well, for all the reasons that Karen mentioned. So really don't want to belabor it anymore and just be here to stand for any questions the board may have.
Thank you very much, sir. Any questions from the board to Mr. Evan on behalf of the applicant? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Did we have anyone sign up for Zoom or on any
We do not.
offsite? All right. Is there anyone here in the public that would like to speak on this? Seeing none, then apparently we have no public comments on this particular item. So are there any further questions by the zoning board of the staff or the applicant before we get to the consideration? If not, we will close the public comments at this time, and we're up for discussion of the application by the zoning board. Any comments? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Ken Sanderson, I would move to recommend approval of a conditional use permit for an outdoor storage yard for equipment, materials, and supplies in association with a construction contractor office and shop with the stipulations and for the reasons outlined in the staff report.
Fred Wingert, second.
Any discussion? I would only add, as Rod Richardson, Vice Chair, that it certainly appears that all the boxes have been ticked on requirements for this, and it doesn't appear there have been any complaints, and it appears there's more than adequate screening. And based on the staff's recommendation, I certainly will support this. If there are no other comments, I would call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. When will this application go to the Board of County Commissioners?
Thank you. This is Karen Miller. This will be considered December 5th, 2024 at 9:30 a.m. in the board hearing room, which is this room at 111 South Cherry Street in Olathe, Kansas.
Okay. Any questions? Well, that concludes that particular application. Are there any other business to come before the board? Anybody have anything? Consider a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I wanted to note that the facility that's just north of this facility that was originally going to be the concrete facility, and I think we approved it for the builder. That is really looks nice. It's very nice facility. They've done great landscaping. It's been a really nice addition. It kind of sat there for about 6 months and nothing happened, but it really has turned out very nice for the community.
Excellent. Great comment. Kind of comment we like. So
Yeah,
All right.
thank you, Sean Penley, County Planner Staff. That's good to note. That new owner has, we've appreciated working with them. It's certainly an improvement over our concrete contractor fronting along Metcalf there, where there was very little screening. We appreciate that. They've certainly been responsive to both planning and public works staff. We've worked with them on improvements to the site. So glad to see that that's been completed.
all right. Did we get the motion to adjourn passed? Did we do that? We need a motion. We need a motion in a second.
Kelly Rast, make a motion to adjourn.
Fred Wingert.
Ken Sanderson.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unopposed. We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, guys.